All right, this week we are finally finishing up the end of Chapter 6. Last week when we were here in class, and let's see, today is, just for point of reference, it's November 16th, 2016. So last week we were here on Wednesday. We spent the whole time working through Chapter 6. We got up to the bottom of this page here, and we got a couple of errors that happened. And then for whatever reason, my recorder, the screen recorder that I use to do these videos, crashed. And I tried to recover it. I've done it in the past, and I couldn't. And today when I came to class and started up the recorder, it said, do you want to recover your recording? So my recording apparently is being processed right now, and I'll be able to post it. But what we're going to do here is try to kind of work through the problems that we were having. I was looking through the stuff that we did, and we basically had gotten done with completing the edits to this file. So the file is in the models folder, and it's comment RB. And then when I launched my prompt today to make sure that everything was working, I initiated the Rails console command, and then ran all the commands that have the little double chevrons here or whatever. And each one of them worked. And I think last time we ran, I think it was maybe this one here, and it failed, or one of these failed, and we weren't really quite sure how to fix it, and we were at the end of the course, or end of the night, so we couldn't really do it. But I did successfully type in all these commands here, and they're all good to go. So we're going to be moving on to page 114. All right, as we move on to the next page here, the topic becomes something called callbacks. And callbacks are, in essence, a way to send stuff back and forth to the server when you're doing, communications and processing of data. Active Record has a number of different callbacks that are basically like automatic or built-ins, and you can see all of them are before and after. So before or after you create, before or after you save something, or before and after you destroy something. And this really corresponds very closely to all the CRUD operations. All right, so they have a little example here of a very simple callback. And notice that really what you're doing is you're setting up a method here. So before create, and then we throw in a false. And this would be something that you would add to a model in order to make sure that certain things happen. So if you look at what it says here, it says, for instance, if you define before create, you ensure that this model will never be created. So before it's created, you put in false, it's not going to work at all. So you got to be careful on how you use it. But it does have its place in terms of how we apply it. So in this example here, we're going to make a few edits to the comment RB file. I happen to have that one open already, but where you would find it is in your models folder. So you'd go to the root of your project, app, and models, and then comment, and then open it up in your text editor. I know like the folder structure of these applications can be a little bit intimidating because there's so many folders and files, but we're getting to the point now where we've done so much active record that we know that mostly we're working in the database folder, the database migration folder, and then the apps models folder, because when all the models get generated, that's where they go. As we start moving into the subsequent chapters, you guys will see that we're going to start exploring other parts of the structure. And usually we'll be working in the app folder as a general rule. And most of the other stuff we don't touch unless we really need to. All right, let's proceed with the edits. So I'm going to bring this up here. I'm going to see if I can split screen myself a little bit. Let's try that again. There we go. Seems like half the battle is just getting geared up to do the work. All right, so I see that these first couple sections are the same. This one's the same. So what we're going to do is we're going to add this callback here that basically says, after we create, we're going to output a message. We will notify the author in Chapter 9. I'm not sure why Chapter 9, but that's what they're going to do. Save your changes. The next one that we're going to adjust is the same file. And there's a little directive that we put in here. And notice this is handled a little bit differently. One's being put in as a method, and then one's being put in as a statement. So we have the after create. We're putting it as a directive, and then we're basically what we're doing is we're calling on a method. So really what has to happen is this name that we see here, and you see it on the left side of my screen, really is going to replace this name. So we can basically do the callback here with this syntax and call the method, and then the method with the same name will execute. All right, go ahead, save your work. And okay, there's one part here that I'm kind of ignoring, and that's this little tidbit here. So instead of saying notify the author, we're actually putting in a little bit of code in the form of a hash, right, because the pound sign's in front of it. And what that's going to do is it's basically going to execute this command in Ruby. So it's going to take the article that we're working with, the user of that article, and their email address. That's the author. So it's going to make a little connection there between what is in the article, who created the article, and then the creator of the article. And that's being done programmatically. And that allows it to be dynamic too, so that way we can really kind of apply it to many situations. All right, now that we've come this far, we're going to go back to our prompt. If you still have the interactive Ruby prompt running, you do want to exit out of there and drop down to a regular prompt. And then we're going to run this migration here. It's actually not a migration. We're going to be generating the migration, which we're then going to subsequently run. So let's go ahead, copy that, and paste it into the prompt. So this is going to generate a migration, and that creates a migration file in the database migrate folder. Remember that. And that migration is going to be named with a time and date stamp and this long string. And you can see it says rename password to hashed password. All right, and we'll talk about what that does. All right, and you can see it successfully completed the command and shows you the file it created. Now we're going to go into that file, so we're going to find the file that we just created. So we'll drop to the root of our project, database folder, migrate folder, and rename password to hashed password RB, and bring it up in your editor. And now we're going to make some tweaks. So we're just going to basically add to the file this little string here, and it's fairly easy to understand. So we're going to rename the column users, password, hashed password. So we're going to rename those columns. Now that we go through the process of saving this, I want you to keep very firmly in your mind what's going to happen is we generated the migration, but we didn't do anything with it. We just created a file. We went into the file, and now we're issuing a directive within a method. So when we run the migration, it looks for a method called change, and this is how we're going to change our database. So we're issuing a command, and this is going to be handled by Active Record. It's going to do the work to perform this action. So the next step, of course, once everything is saved, is to run rake db migrate. And then what that does is it goes through all the migration files, makes sure everything is updated, and if there is a change to be made, it will give you a response just like this, and you can see that it successfully ran the migration and changed things for us. Now, I know we've been in the habit of running this SQLite browser software that you can find out on the web if you don't have it, and I'm trying to get you guys in the mindset of it's handy to have a database product sitting there at the ready so you can look at the stuff that you're doing when you're working with models. I know that you can do it all from the prompt. That is a way that you can do it. But I think in terms of like fast and efficient workflow, I think it's a little bit easier to use this program. So what I'm doing, you can follow my navigation here, is I'm opening up the database that we're currently working with. You can see all our tables. And then what we're going to do is we are going to look at the tables that we created, and I'm not really sure which table we changed, except I kind of do. It's this one here, because prior to this, that third column was named password. Now we changed it to hashed password. Do you know what it means to hash a password, you guys? Have you guys ever heard that? That's the process of doing an encryption using a particular algorithm. So, for example, I'm going to bring up a page here. I'm an admin on our Kronos web server, and I have access to all the user accounts that are on the system. So, for example, if I just pick one of these people at random, I can control their user account and do all sorts of things. But you see, when I come in here and I create a password for them, I can just type in plain English and see it. But after it gets saved, it turns into something that looks like this. So this is the encrypted password that already exists. I do have people that say, well, can't you just look it up and tell me what it is? Well, frankly, I probably could find a way to hack it and crack it. But no, I can't. I mean, I can't look at this and tell you what your password is. Now, the way that something in text becomes that is by use of a hashing algorithm. And I know that that's coming up here in a page or two, but I just want to have you understand why is it we're going through the process of changing that to hashed password, because basically instead of storing the password in the database in plain text, completely insecure, somebody gets into your file system or your database, they can read that and they're pretty much in your database. You can do whatever they want. But if you can hash it like this, you can see that causes a problem. You know, it's another hurdle that a hacker has to jump over to get to your information. All right, so we did the migration and it worked. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to modify the user RB file. So let's do that. Now that one is in the app folder under models. We'll open that up with Notepad++. All right, now let's try to figure out what changes we need to make here. All right, so you see, here's one thing that we need to change. Right up at the top here, we're adding a little directive where we're going to be looking at basically the password. How are we getting to the password, basically, is what this is going to do. We have the validate statements. That stuff's all okay, so we're good up to here. And then we're going to add, looks like we're going to add a few lines. So we're going to add, right below that password validation, we're going to add these two. And I'm hoping you guys are getting to the point now where you can look at these statements and not see them as something cryptic at all. So the first one says validates length of password, so we have to be between 4 and 20 characters. Seems pretty reasonable. And the other one validates the presence of password. It also validates if the password is required. The password, is it required? I would hope so. All right, so we have the next few lines, has one profile, has many articles with all that silly little syntax that we put together, has many replies through articles, source would be comments, and then we have a bunch of stuff to add down here. So let's grab all of that at once and talk through it a little bit. And let's do a little bit of formatting. Remember, 2-space indent for Ruby files. May as well create the same kind of spacing structure here. All right, I don't believe, oh, there's even more. Let's go ahead and put this stuff in. I thought we were about done, but maybe not. But what's happening here in essence is kind of a series of methods that help us to perform a series of actions. The result of which is having an encrypted password in the database. All right. Now, here's one interesting thing. We just typed in a significant amount of code here, copy-pasted it. You know, when you're working with a class file, and you can think of languages that you've used where you create classes, and in languages like Java, for example, we'll use keywords like public and private, and sometimes we opt not to use them at all. When we don't use it at all, I mean it implies public. In this case, do you guys notice that we're throwing in a directive for protected? So that means it is, in essence, a private section of the document. So that's why all this stuff here is kind of follows that directive. All right, let's take a look at this stuff and what it's doing. So we have a method called self-authentication, and we're passing in email and password. And then we're doing a little command here, find by email. So we're going to look, and then once we find that, we're storing it in user, and then we'll return the user if it's a user and the person's authenticated with a password. That's pretty logical. If the person's authenticated, we check the password. So what we're going to do is there's a little command here. Notice the command is encrypt. It encrypts the password that's put in, and then it stores it in itself. Notice how here we're using the keyword self. Does that sound similar to something that happens in other languages? That's exactly correct. So it's that sort of thing. What's it referring to? It's referring back to itself. All right, so after we have this protected declaration here, we then move on, and we have a couple of different methods. So we have Encrypt New Password. So if we have a password that's blank, then we will run the encryption. Check to see if the password is required. In that case, is it blank? What does this mean? Or, right? Is the password present? Then finally, we have the little encrypt method, and that actually operates off of a known encryption approach, and that is a thing called SHA-1. So it's a hashing technique for encrypting passwords. So if you wanted to create your own hash, you could actually go out to the web. And if you just type that in, there's actually a very sophisticated little explanation of it here on Wikipedia, where they show that if you put something in, the algorithm that they actually use to hash it, if you're curious. And I think it's fascinating because there's also spots online, and I think this is one of them, that, if I put in, some sort of a thing, and I choose the hashing approach that I want. SHA is one that's been around a long time, so that's one of the reasons why it's used. So if I took that word and hashed it, it becomes this. Now the trick is for a hacker is to flip it, right? To take the hash and turn it back into what it was, and that's not quite as simple. It's not that it's not doable, but it is not as simple. But there's a number of different hash approaches that you can use, and you can see, there's a bunch. At this point, this one is actually somewhat crackable. If you have the right, I usually recommend you jump up to this level. Another one that's used quite a bit is the MD5, and often those are work in tandem. So just so you know, just a little interesting information. All right, let's move forward here. Let's make sure we save our work. And they've kind of gone through all these explanations here. So what we're going to do now is we're going to bring up our prompt and we're going to play with these. You can see there's not much left here. We got a page or so left, and we're finally done with this chapter. We can put it behind us. All right, so we're going to need the Rails console here. So go to your prompt and type in the command to launch it. All right, and let's do these commands one at a time. So let's pull up the first user. Store it in user. That worked just fine. We're going to set the user's password to secret, and I think we already have one in there. And then notice we're doing this manually now. We're actually doing user password confirmation equals secret. So it's like where you have two password fields and you fill one in and you fill in the second. And sure enough, that one worked as well. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to do user.save. That one I can type in. It's nice and short. And now that has been committed to the database. All right. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to type this command. And what this one's going to do, it's going to validate for us that the password that we typed turned into this. Now, it would be really fun, or actually not even fun, but interesting, is if I came here and I typed in secret and hashed it, and if you take a look at this string here, is that the same string? And of course, I'm kind of like looking at the kind of the beginning and the end of it, and sure enough, it is. So we know that the hash actually worked as intended. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to run user authentication. So I want you to just keep in mind what we're doing here. We're basically simulating the procedure of actually operating the application. We're going through the process of putting in the user, asking for a password, confirming the password, showing the password, hashing the password, and now we're going through the authentication process. The person is basically typing in their username and their password, and the user has been added then. Now we can do that one more time. And then what this one is going to do is it's going to try to log in for the same user, but it's putting in the wrong password. And notice how it comes back with nil. That's equivalent to basically a false. The person cannot log in. The next command is going to bring up a different user. So we're going to grab the last user in the list and call him second user. And then we're going to kind of do a similar procedure. And then notice the approach on this code. I do have to buffer this though because it's got a little line break in it. All right, so if you look at this one, what's going on is second user update attribute. So this time, instead of like doing an authenticate or any of that kind of stuff, we're actually taking the stuff that's stored and we're forcing it through these commands. So we're doing password and then password confirmation and forcing them in, and then you can see it wrote to the database right away because that's basically an update. Finally, we're going to authenticate this user using Mary and secret. That's assuming that we have the same stuff in the database, and we do, so that one works. So we managed to get that user logged in with the right password just using a series of Ruby commands. All right, I'm going to pause the video here and work through a few issues we have here in class. All right, we took a few minutes here to figure out what was going on, and we got everybody working. Almost. All right, we got most of the way working. Okay, I'll come back and help you still, all right, because I'm rolling video now. All right, so basically some of the issues that we were seeing was, for example, making sure that all the things that needed to be in this user RB file were there, and I'm just trying to go through from memory. We added this, we added those two lines, and then we basically added everything from here on down. So make sure that those things are in there correctly. Make sure that you've saved your file, and then once you make a change to any one of the model files, you have to run rake db migrate from a regular prompt to rebuild the models, otherwise it won't work. All right, so if you were successful, that's great. But if you, let's say we're doing a couple of commands, like maybe you type the first one and then the second one failed, and then you come back and you just try to run the second one again, you don't want to do that. You want to go back to the first one so it forces it to reload user from the first user in the database. Another thing that you can always add before you do like these interactive Ruby things is to type in the reload command, just reload exclamation, and that just also helps. So if you make changes to your models, save them, run the migrate again. And then if you're going to run these commands, start with this one so that it loads everything correctly. Hopefully you got it all to work. If not, you can always contact me and I can help walk you through it. It's kind of an attention to detail thing. We also had one instance here where some of the migration files were duplicates, and what I mean by the migration files is in the database folder here in Migrate. I had somebody that had duplicates here. So what happens is that the directives are probably conflicting if you have a duplicate file, so it doesn't know what to do. So you have to get rid of one of them. Usually you keep the newest one. Okay, so let's go ahead and proceed. All right, we're going to move forward, and what's coming up on the next page here is kind of a revisit of the seeds file. That's in the database folder. If you remember what we did with this file, we basically used it to pump content into the database. In fact, we created a user right up here on the first line with a password, and then we also created categories for the database. And then if you look at what they're doing in the book here, they're throwing in a bunch of other things. In fact, notice what they're doing with Mary and her password. And I'm going to try to mimic this here. So they got email, and then on a separate line, they put password. And here's one of these. Do you tab or do you space? And then if you notice, they added one additional line, which is the password confirmation. Categories are all the same: programming, event, travel, music, and TV. And then they add a number of other entries here, which I'm sure you guys can figure out what they do. But if you recall from earlier in the chapter, the seeds file is basically used to pump information into the database manually. So we run, in essence, a series of Ruby commands, just like we're doing from the prompt, but we're putting them in a file, and then when we tell the seed to run, it will generate all this stuff and put it into the database. Now what I'm finding curious here is, all right, we have this code, we're saving it. It doesn't say anything about running the seeds and putting it into the database. So I think it's kind of interesting that they don't tell you to do that. And I don't see that I put any notes in here either. But let me ask you guys this. Who remembers how to run the seed file? Yeah, we were just doing a rake db migrate, which runs all the migrations. But there's also a rake command for doing the seeds. I'll pause for a moment and I'll let you guys figure it out. All right, I put the challenge out there, and I had somebody guess right away, and then my voice from cyberspace, Nick, he guessed too, and a couple of people weren't able to guess. But basically, in order for this stuff to pump into the database, we do need to run a rake command, which I'll do right now so you can see it in action. Except that you do from a regular prompt, not the Ruby prompt. So here we're going to do rake db seed. And what that'll do is it'll go in here, it'll read this file, and then it'll push that stuff. All right, well, actually, it looks like it didn't work. All right, well, now I guess I have to figure out why. So in order to troubleshoot this a little bit, I'm going to do exactly what it says. I'm going to run the command again, and then include the argument of trace. And hopefully what that'll do is it'll give me a little bit more information. Oh, there we go. All right, so what it's doing is it's going through and it's finding some issues. So I'm guessing we might need to run a db migrate first. Let's give that a shot. All right, and that didn't do anything. So I guess I'm a little concerned here that we have maybe either issues with how the code is in here or actually what it's telling us. And yeah, so seeds RB line 9. All right, so what I'm going to do, and this is where our database tool comes in handy, is I'm actually going to look at the information that was maybe put in there. So we're going to do user articles create 3 times. So let's see if it did anything with that. So articles, and then we can look at the titles. So I have a couple of theories as to what's going wrong here. I mean, this stuff we've already done, and it's already there. So what I could do is this. I'm going to actually cut this stuff and save it. It's still in my clipboard or my buffer or whatever you want to call it. And I'm going to go back to the prompt and I'm going to run that seed command again with just the user information. Okay, so that seemed to work, right? All right, and the way that I can find that out is by going to the user table and it looks like the information's in there. All right, the other thing that you can do is like actually paste in the rest of this stuff. We already did the categories before, right? So I really don't need to seed them again. And I'm wondering if that's really what the problem is. But this stuff is new, right? So let's save it with just those directives. And then let's run the seed again. Yeah, I mean, the categories we already did. The user I ran on its own, that seems to be okay. So now if I run it, we'll see if it throws back any error messages at this point. All right. Okay, so it says undefined local variable or method user for main object. Oh, okay. So I'm going to see if I can control Z my way out of this. All right. So I'm going to remove the categories. That's already done. But we have a user create. And why don't I do this? Why don't we do, I don't know, who should we put in here? Billy. Somebody, right? So what I'm doing, so these tried to run, but there was no user because we pulled up the definition for user. So we're creating a new user here with the password, and then these commands should run. All right, so let's save that. And if my intuition is correct, we'll have success. All right, so that's good. Now, of course, the way we can check that is we can go to the user table, and there's the new user with the password. All right, so you guys see what we did there? Apparently what was triggering the problem was the fact that we still had the categories in there. Now, that's kind of, strange on behalf of the book, and I probably should put in a note here to indicate that. All right. The last thing that we're going to do before we call it a night here, and yeah, believe it or not, another whole week on Chapter 6, but it's just that challenging. So is they want us to go through and they want us to make sure that all the models that we have match up with the stuff in the book here, just to, so that as we move forward, that everything's kind of in sync. Now I'm going to kind of jump. All right, so we're going to be looking at comment. That one I know I already have open, so now it does look a little different, doesn't it? All right, so the one thing that they did here is that they removed this in this listing. My inclination tells me don't touch the version that we have. That's what my inclination tells me. But if we run into a problem in the future with this little snippet of code, we'll know to come back. Does anybody remember how to put a comment mark in Ruby? Yeah, it's a pound sign. All right, so I'm leaving a little note to myself so I know. All right, let's open up the others. Category RB. That's app, models. See if that matches up. That looks okay. Right, okay. And then in the fashion of working backwards, let's look at article RB. I'm getting the feeling that this one might be a little different too. Nope, that all looks the same. All right, so we had that one little difference in the comment file. So for the most part, not a big deal. But if we like run something like in a future chapter and we get an error on that file, I've already put my comment in, and it's a good idea for you guys to do the same thing. And then I also can look back at the page to which it was referring to. All right, I know that was a long, challenging chapter, and you guys are probably up to your eyeballs in active record and database migrations and abstractions and all that kind of stuff. And ideally, we would be working on the next chapter, but this chapter is that important that we get everything working correctly. And in the subsequent chapter, and unit, which are already released, you guys can start working ahead. I do have all my old videos there. But next week here in class, in the classroom, we will be diving into that chapter. I encourage you to get a head start if you want. And good luck on all your coding. All right.